Factoring quadratic trinomials by decomposition. That's what I'm going to teach you today. But first, let's just have a quick look at this one. If we're asked to factor something like 2x squared plus 5x plus 3, there's no common factor, right? So you can't remove a common factor, but that doesn't mean it can't be factored. And this is the way we were factoring it on Friday, by taking 2x squareds, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 x's and 3 1's and making them into a rectangle. And once you have them formed into a rectangle, then you can figure out the side lengths of that rectangle, and that'll give you the factors. So if we look here along the bottom, there's x and another x and 3 1's. So that makes 2x plus 3. And along the side here, there's an x and a 1. So that's x plus 1. And those are the factors. So if I want to factor this, x plus 1 times 2x plus 3. And that works, and it's correct. And I could expand that and see that it does equal 2x squared plus 5x plus 3. And that's great. But every time you're going to factor, you don't want to have to pull out algebra tiles. So we need to figure out a way to go from here, the expanded form, to here, the factored form, algebraically. So let's look at how to do that. And the method that we're going to use is called decomposition. Decomposition of ax squared plus bx plus c. If you're going to factor, it needs to be in this form. Ax squared plus bx plus c. It's a quadratic, so it has to have an x squared term. It doesn't necessarily need these two other terms because they could be zeros. But if it's not in that form, then we need to get it in that form first by combining like terms and putting things in the right order. But this one's good. 2x squared plus 5x plus 3. We already know what the answer is because we did it with tiles. But let's look at how to do this. So the first step is remove a common factor if possible. First step, remove a common factor if possible. Like I said, not possible here. There's nothing common to those three terms. So we'll go to step 2. And step 2 says, find two numbers with a product of a times c and a sum of b. A, b, and c, you can see up here at the top where they are in the equation. So a is the coefficient on the squared term, b is the coefficient on the linear term, so just the x, and then c is the constant term. So we want to find a product, I'm just going to write p, of a times c, which in this case is 2 times 3, so 6. And we want to find a sum of b, and b is 5. So we want to find two numbers that have a product of 6, which means they multiply together to equal 6, and a sum of 5, and that means they add together to 5. 3 and 2, yeah, or 2 and 3. Step 3 says decompose the middle term using the two numbers found. This is why it's called decomposition. Do you know what decomposing means? Breaking down, right. Breaking down is decomposing. So we're going to take that middle term, the 5x, and we're going to decompose it. We're going to break it down into two different things. And the two different things are the numbers that we found. So this is going to become 2x squared plus 3x plus 2x plus 3. The 5x was broken down into 3x and 2x. Why 3 and 2?
Because of this.
Right, because those are the numbers that have the product and sum that we're looking for. 3 and 2. So we put 3x and 2x. We need the x's there because they're replacing the 5x, right? If we just had 3 plus 2, well, that's 5, but that's not 5x. So we need the x there as well. The fourth step is something called factoring by grouping. So it means we take the first two terms and make them into a group. And then we look just at that group and say, what's the greatest common factor in that group of terms? So 2x squared and 3x, it's x, right. So I'm going to take out the x. out of just those two. I'm going to take 2x squared and divide it by x. That's 2x. And then 3x divided by x, that's 3. And then I'm going to continue to factor by grouping. So I take this second group and figure out what's the greatest common factor there in 2x plus 3. 1. Somebody said 1. Yeah. So I'll go plus 1 and then divide both of those by 1. And that's 2x plus 3. Now what? Now look at the whole thing, and there's a common factor in here. And it's a big one. It's 2x plus 3. It's there and there. So I'm going to factor out the 2x plus 3. So 2x plus 3. And then when I factor that out, I'm looking at this whole, factoring it out of all of this, of the x times 2x plus 3. So I'm left with x. And then when I factor it out of here, I'm left with 1. And that's the answer. Here's the next one we're going to factor. And we're going to follow the same steps. Anybody remember what the first step was?
Yes.
Yes, what was it?
Basically, you multiply 10 and then...
Before that.
Oh, before that? You find a common factor.
Greatest common factor. Is there one?
Wait,
Is
no, never mind, no.
So because there's no common factor, we're going to go to the next step. And here's what we're going to do. We need to find a particular product and sum. The product, you multiply the first term by the last term, or the coefficient of the first term by the last term. So 3 times negative 10.
30.
Negative 30. And the sum, it's the middle term. Negative 13. Negative 15 times 2 is negative 30. Negative 15 plus 2 is negative 13. So those numbers work. So now we need the next step, which is decomposing the middle term. So this becomes 3x squared. That stays the same. And then I take that negative 13x and split it into negative 15x minus 2x minus 10. So that should be plus 2x. We're replacing it with negative 15 and positive 2. Next step is factor by grouping. So we'll take this group of numbers, 3x squared minus 15x, and figure out what's the greatest common factor. X? I think there's something more to it than that. 3x, right. So I'll write down 3x, and then I'm going to do 3x squared divided by 3x. I'm left with x, 1x. And then negative 15x divided by 3x, negative 5. Then the same thing with the second group. The second group is 2x minus 10. What's the common factor? 2. So I'll say plus 2. 2x divided by 2 is x. Negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. At this point, we see that these two things in brackets are the same. And like I said before, we have to have that. You know, if I hadn't noticed that mistake with the positive that I did at first, then they wouldn't have matched, and I would have gone back and went, oh, what did I do wrong? But these are the same. So one of the factors is x minus 5. What's the other factor?
3x plus 2.
3x plus 2. So it's what's left when you get rid of the x minus 5s. You're left with 3x and plus 2. I could check my answer by expanding that and see if it comes back to 3x squared minus 13x minus 10. And it does. For this one, we need a product of negative 40, because that's 8 times negative 5, and a sum of negative 18. And the numbers, I think, that you guys came up with were negative 20 and 2. Is that right? Yeah, negative 20 times 2 is negative 40. Negative 20 plus 2 is negative 18. Did anybody reverse those 2 and negative 20? Doesn't matter, no. So now I'm gonna do 8p squared plus 2p minus 20p minus 5.
A new question?
No, all I did was replace the negative 18p with those two.
Yes.
And then the next step is, once you've broken down that middle term, is factor by grouping. So in this group, what's common? 2p. And when I factor that out, 8p squared divided by 2p is 4p. And 2p divided by 2p is 1. Don't forget to put the 1 in there. Then I need to look at the second group. If this term is negative, always take out a negative. So the common factor there is 5, but because that's negative, we're going to take a negative 5. And negative 20p divided by negative 5 is 4p. Negative 5 divided by 5 is 1. It's, well, let's see if you got the same answer. Okay. You did get the same answer? Yeah. So now we have 4p plus 1. That's the common factor. And then the other stuff that's there is the 2p minus 5. If you reversed it and did negative 20p plus 2p, where I did 2 minus 20, that's okay. You're going to get the same answer. But you'll probably get 2p minus 5 times 4p plus 1. But that's okay. It's the same thing. What is the first step?
Oh my gosh, there is a
Times the two, no, factor.
Common factor is the first step.
Yeah.
So what's the common factor?
3.
3. Don't forget that step. Take out a 3 first because it's a common factor. So we'll do 3 and then 18 divided by 3, that's 6. 6h squared plus h minus 5.
Okay, now I see.